A fleet of 100 ships sail through the night, breaking the waves of the Atlantic Ocean. It carries a formidable force of thousands of men. For all these soldiers, this will be their first test in combat. They've never faced an enemy, and they don't even know if the men they're about to encounter are their enemies at all. This is because we are not in 1944, and the fleet we're talking about does not sail toward the French coast of Normandy. This scene took place 19 months earlier and more than 1,000 miles to the south, near the coast of French Morocco. This is the story of Operation Torch. As the wheels of war geared up in 1942, Western Allied leaders began considering the prospect of striking back at the Germans and Italians. The Americans had entered the war, and it gave the Allies a significant boost in men and material. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and American President Franklin Roosevelt considered several different scenarios, of which some were more and some less likely to succeed. In the end, they made the conclusion that the time to invade Europe had not yet arrived, at least not before the Germans and Italians were not defeated on other fronts. By this, they meant Africa. Since the Italian invasion of Egypt in June 1940, the British troops were engaged in a series of battles against the Italian and later German forces in the North African desert. The fighting during this time was marked by the fluctuating fortunes of Axis and Allied forces. After the First Battle of El Alamein in June 1942, the time came to strike a decisive blow to the Axis in Africa. By that time, British and American leaders had already agreed on launching Operation Torch, the landing of Allied troops in northern Africa west of Tunisia. Although the decision to strike the Axis in Africa first was an obvious choice for both leaders, making it happen was not such an easy task. General Dwight Eisenhower, who would be appointed Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force of the North African Theater of Operations, had devised two scenarios. The eastern option, one that Eisenhower preferred, anticipated the landing of Allied troops in Algeria at Oran, Algiers, and Bone. From these points, Allied troops would quickly advance to Tunisia. Bone, the present-day city of Annaba, was less than 90 miles distant from the Tunisian border. The western option was slightly different. Apart from Oran and Algiers, Allied troops would land at Casablanca in French Morocco. This option would have meant that the Allies would take more time to reach Tunis, but it would have provided them with a secure base for the deployment of arms and supplies. Although the western option seemed less favorable because of Casablanca's distance from Tunisia and the fact that the turbulent Atlantic water could make landing quite difficult, the combined chiefs of staff decided to go with it. This was primarily because of the fear that the landing in northern Africa might trigger the entry of Spain into the war, which would make transport through the Strait of Gibraltar practically impossible. However, a much bigger problem was what kind of welcome party the French forces stationed in Morocco and Tunisia would throw to Allied troops. Would they see them as friends or foes? After the fall of France in June 1940, colonial troops of the French colonial empire, known as Armée Coloniale, were torn between loyalties to the Vichy government, which collaborated with Nazi Germany, and the Free French forces led by General Charles de Gaulle, who resisted the Axis powers. Although the Free French controlled troops in French Equatorial Africa, those in West and North Africa were under control of the Vichy government. These forces numbered about 120,000 troops, and more importantly, were in control of the French fleet, which was one of the largest in the world before the war. This created tension and distrust among the Allies, who were uncertain whether French forces in North Africa would fight with the Axis or switch sides to join the Allies. By the time of Operation Torch, French troops in North Africa were not suitably equipped to wage war with the Allies or Axis. However, the formidable naval potential, the air force of 500 modern planes, and a well-established coastal defense still made them a potentially serious opponent. However, aside from being ill-equipped overall, the French had a much bigger problem. Their soldiers' morale was at a very low level, and their loyalty to the Vichy government was uncertain. The attitude of the French forces towards the war was mixed. Although the official stance of the Vichy government required them to defend their positions against any invasion, many soldiers and officers were reluctant to fight against the Allies, seeing them as liberators rather than enemies. It is important to note that this was the case only toward American soldiers, not the British. French still remembered how the British fleet attacked them at Mers el Kabir in July 1940, killing 1,297 French sailors. After all, the United States did have diplomatic relations with the Vichy France, while the British exclusively supported the Free French. In months before the operation started, the U.S. Consul General in Rabat, Robert Murphy, tried to gain support for the offensive from the French Liberation Movement. This was a movement of Frenchmen living in North Africa who did not side with de Gaulle, but opposed collaboration with the Germans and wanted to liberate France. As Operation Torch approached, the French forces became aware something was going on and started preparing for the possibility of an Allied invasion. They fortified their positions and conducted regular drills to ensure readiness. Despite these efforts, the uncertainty about their true allegiance persisted. One thing, however, Eisenhower made certain: if there would be fighting with the French, they would have to fire the first shot. On the night of November 7, 1942, a large American convoy captured the coast of French Morocco with a mission to land troops near Casablanca and capture the city. In command of the Western Task Force that comprised the U.S. 1st Armored Corps was Major General George S. Patton. The plan was to land at 3 different sites: Safi, Port Liate, and Fedala. The first landing took place at Safi, 150 miles south of Casablanca, where Major General Ernest N. Harmon's Sub-Task Force Blackstone was tasked with securing the town port and surrounding areas. The troops began to disembark silently before midnight on November 8th. However, as they approached the beaches, French forces opened artillery fire, forcing the Americans to return fire immediately. By 10:45 a.m., all French batteries were silenced. The Americans captured the town, including key points like the post office, telecommunications station, and port facilities. The next day, French reinforcements attempted to retake the town but were stopped by U.S. Navy planes and ground forces. Harmon then advanced north with elements of the 2nd Armored Division to join the main assault on Casablanca. The second landing took place the same day at Port Liate, 88 miles north of Casablanca. Over there, Major General Lucien K. Truscott's Sub-Task Force Goalpost had the task of capturing the port and, more importantly, 2 adjacent airfields. The landing faced even stronger French opposition than at Safi. French planes strafed the beaches and coastal artillery fired on the landing craft. To make things worse, heavy seas and navigational errors caused delays and confusion. Despite these challenges, the Americans slowly gained ground. The hero of the day was the commander of the destroyer transport Dallas, who sailed upstream the Cebu River with a raider detachment to spearhead the assault on one of the airfields. The most intense resistance came from the Medea fortress. However, after only 1 strafe of Navy bombers, the garrison surrendered. By November 11th, all intense fighting stopped and all targets were put under American control. The main landing at Fedala, a small port close to Casablanca, was led by Major General Jonathan W. Anderson. Subtask Force Brushwood, comprising the 3rd Infantry Division, faced significant difficulties from the very start. High surf and strong currents scattered the landing craft. Many boats were damaged or destroyed, delaying the arrival of troops and equipment. The first troops ashore captured the town of Fedala quickly, but faced continued resistance from coastal batteries. The obstacle was overrun after Colonel William H. Wilbur combined an infantry company with 4 tanks and assaulted the French battery, which caused most problems to the Americans. After only 20 minutes, the battery was silenced. By the morning of November 10th, American troops had established a beachhead and began advancing towards Casablanca. Patton himself came ashore around midday, ready to lead the push towards the city. The Americans faced sporadic resistance, with French forces using artillery and small arms to slow their advance. Despite these challenges, Patton's forces pressed on, determined to capture Casablanca. On November 10, Americans reached the outskirts of Casablanca. The French were determined to defend Casablanca and engaged Patton's men with artillery and machine guns. Although they were causing significant casualties among the attacking forces, the Americans continued their assault. By the end of the day, American forces had reached the eastern and southern edges of Casablanca. The arrival of General Harman's tanks from Safi bolstered the American position, tightening the noose around the city. As fighting continued, Patton sent Colonel Hobart R. Gay to deliver a ceasefire proposal to the French commander in Casablanca. By November 11th, French resistance began to wane. As the Americans prepared for a final assault on the city, the French commander in Casablanca, recognizing the futility of further resistance, decided to surrender. This decision ended the fighting, and American forces took control of the city. On November 8, 1942, 400 miles further to the northeast, the Center Task Force, led by Major General Lloyd R. Frendenhall, landed near the city of Oran. This force included the 1st Infantry Division with the 1st Ranger Battalion and Combat Command B of the 1st Armored Division. The plan was to land at 3 beaches along a 50-mile stretch of coastline, beaches X and Y to the west of Oran and beach Z to the east. At Beach X, 28 miles west of Oran, the landing began at 1 a.m. A series of problems delayed the troops. Unexpected currents pushed transports out of position, while an engine fire in one landing boat alerted the French. Despite these setbacks, the troops reached the shore, although late and scattered. However, even then, the problems continued. Deep draft tank lighters got stuck on a sandbar and caused further delays. By noon, American tanks and support vehicles had broken out from the beach. They captured the village of Lourmel, 10 miles inland, thus securing the beachhead. At Beach Y, 15 miles west of Oran, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt's 26th Regimental Combat Team faced similar issues. High surf and inexperienced boat crews delayed the landings. By 6:45 a.m., when most of the troops were ashore, French warship La Surprise appeared and attacked the landing forces. However, the quick reaction from American vessels sent the French ship to the bottom of the sea. By mid-morning, the troops pushed inland and captured 2 nearby villages. However, from there, their advance was slowed down by heavy artillery fire from a hill mass. Beach Z, 20 miles east of Oran, received the bulk of Frendenhall's troops. The 16th and 18th Regimental Combat Teams of Major General Terry Allen's 1st Infantry Division and the 1st Ranger Battalion landed with almost no opposition. The Rangers captured 2 coastal batteries and the town of Arzew by mid-morning. The 16th Infantry advanced quickly, and by taking 2 villages ahead of schedule, they set up a defensive line 8 miles inland. Tanks of the 1st Armored then moved directly to strategically important Tarafui airfield. After they captured it, taking 300 prisoners, a fleet of American Spitfires from Gibraltar landed at the airfield. On the sea, Allied forces were not as successful. As part of Operation Reservists, 2 British destroyers, HMS Walney and HMS Heartland, were tasked with a daring raid on the harbor to prevent the French from scuttling their ships or blocking the port. Ships were loaded with American infantrymen from the 6th Armored Infantry Regiment and attempted to sail straight into the harbor and land forces directly onto the docks. However, the raid faced heavy fire from French defenses. Both destroyers were heavily damaged and set on fire. Most of the troops on board were killed or wounded, and the raid failed to capture the harbor. On November 9th, American ground forces encountered a stronger defense. A large infantry attack hit the 16th Infantry, while a lesser assault slowed the 26th Infantry. Both attacks were repelled by mid-afternoon. At the Tafarui airfield, French tanks attacked American armor, but were defeated, leaving 14 destroyed tanks behind. The Americans captured La Seigne airfield with no losses. The Center Task Force now controlled both airfields in the area. Gradually losing ground, French resistance focused on the towns of St. Cloud, Valmy, and Masseron around Oran. To avoid mounting casualties, Major General Frendenhall decided to bypass under the cover of night the strongest French strongpoints and move toward the Oran. It was a risky move, but the Americans succeeded. On November 10th, they attacked Oran from three sides. French defenses were disorganized but still managed to organize an artillery fire against the invaders. By 10:15 a.m., an American armored column broke through the south side of Oran and after intense fighting moved toward the French commander's headquarters in the port. The maneuvers forced the French to call for a ceasefire, which took effect at 12:15 p.m. Only a couple of hours later, French units in Oran surrendered. The capture of Oran was a significant achievement for the Allies. It provided them with a valuable port and airfields to support further operations in North Africa. Further to the east, the Eastern Task Force approached Algiers on the night of November 7, 1942. This force included both American and British troops. The American forces consisted of the 39th Infantry Regiment from the 9th Infantry Division and the 168th and 135th Infantry, both from the 34th Infantry Division. The British included the 11th Infantry and 36th Infantry Brigade and two commando units, number 1 and number 6. Because of the anti-British sentiment among the French, some British units such as number 6 Commando wore American uniforms, while two British destroyers flew American flags. The plan was for American and British forces to land at 3 points along a 50-mile stretch of coast: Beaches Apples and Beer to the west of Algiers, and Beach Charlie to the east. The goal was to take the beaches, secure roads and villages, and capture two airfields before converging on the city of Algiers. The landing at Apples Beach went smoothly. The British 11th Infantry Brigade landed on time and without mishap. By 7 a.m., they had moved 12 miles inland and taken Blida Airfield. However, at Beach Beer, high surf and problems with boat crews delayed the landings. The 168th Infantry Regiment and the British 6th Commando were scattered among 15 miles of coastline. Fortunately, the landing was met with no opposition, which allowed the troops to regroup and advance inland. At Beach Charlie, the 39th Infantry Regiment faced the fiercest resistance. French coastal batteries opened devastating fire on the landing craft as they approached the shore. However, the bigger problem was the high surf that scattered the boats and smashed them against coastal rocks. Despite these troubles, troops managed to disembark, but then stumbled upon an even greater challenge. Instead of flat ground, Charlie Beach had steep cliffs with stairs cut for sightseers. Despite these difficulties, American infantrymen moved 8 miles inland and captured Maison Blanche Airfield by 8:30 a.m. The rest of the day was spent battling the French Marine Artillery Battery, which was ultimately silenced with the support of the British Royal Navy. As in Oran, Allied commanders planned a raid on the port of Algiers. As part of Operation Terminal, the 3rd Battalion of the 135th Infantry embarked on 2 Royal Navy destroyers and moved toward the port. Also, as in Oran, American soldiers were met with heavy resistance. One destroyer was hit and forced back to sea. The other managed to land some troops who secured several objectives in the port. However, surrounded and outnumbered, American troops had to surrender 7 hours after they landed. The situation in Algiers was more than just a military operation, as it had a significant political impact. As headquarters for French forces in North Africa, Algiers was a political maze in which many local French officers and civilians were unhappy with the Vichy regime's collaboration with Nazi Germany. Secretly, they began planning to support the Allies. On the night of November 7, 1942, as Allied forces approached Algiers, a group of French resistance fighters, led by Henri d'Astier de la Vigaret and José Albuquerque, initiated a coup, aiming to take control of key locations in the city to help the Allies. The resistance fighters, including about 400 young Frenchmen, moved quickly. They captured important buildings, including the police headquarters, the telephone exchange, and radio stations. They arrested Vichy officials and disrupted communications to prevent a coordinated response. This swift action surprised the Vichy loyalists and gave the resistance an early advantage. Although the local gendarme eventually retook control over the city, the actions of the resistance were of great importance. In Algiers, The Allied troops faced far less resistance compared to other landing locations. Even so, negotiations for a ceasefire were complex. A representative of President Roosevelt delivered a message to Marshal Pétain in Vichy, requesting cooperation with the landings. Pétain, under Nazi supervision, had to refuse but authorized Admiral Jean-François Darlan, commander of all French forces, to act independently. Darlan, who was in Algiers at the time, made a deal with Eisenhower and ordered all French forces in North Africa to cease resistance to the Allies in return for recognizing him as the French High Commissioner in North Africa. Less than a month and a half later, Darlan was assassinated and his place was taken by General Henri Giraud, leader of the French Liberation Movement. Darlan's orders seem to have been met with ease by the French soldiers. Many of them were reluctant to continue fighting the Allied forces. What's more, they joined the Allied forces and fought the rest of the war against the Axis as soldiers of the French Expeditionary Corps. More importantly, Darlan's order marked the end of Operation Torch. The Allies had successfully secured major ports and airfields in North Africa, thus establishing a foothold for further operations against Axis forces. This victory not only boosted Allied morale, but also paved the way for subsequent campaigns in Tunisia, leading to the eventual total defeat of Axis forces in North Africa. Thank you for watching this episode. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel for more content. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified of our next drop into combat. Stay tuned.